My dad gave my job to his favorite son, so I built a company that destroyed his. He told me to walk away. He never expected me to take half his clients. My father looked me straight in the eye and told me to move aside so his favorite son could take my place. When I pushed back, all he said was, "Walk away if you don't like it." So I did, and it only took a few weeks before he realized just how badly he had misjudged everything. Have you ever had one of those moments where every instinct tells you something is wrong, yet everyone around you acts like you're the unreasonable one? That was exactly where I found myself 5 months ago, sitting across from my father in his enormous mahogany office while he talked about family legacy and quietly slipped one of the biggest betrayals of my life into the conversation. My name is Ethan, and I'm 35 years old. For the last 11 years, I've worked alongside my father at the family logistics company he built from nothing. It wasn't some glamorous corporate empire, but it was a dependable business with loyal clients, solid contracts, and employees who had been with us since long before I even knew what a shipping manifest was. My dad was incredibly proud of what he had created, and for years I was proud to stand beside him as the person he relied on most. I earned my place the hard way. I started at the very bottom, hauling heavy boxes, driving overnight routes in worn-out trucks, and answering phone calls at 3 a.m. whenever a driver missed a checkpoint. Little by little, I took on more responsibility. First, I handled accounting, then I moved into logistics planning, and eventually I stepped into management. For the last 4 years, I had been running almost every part of the business. Payroll, client relationships, fleet improvements, daily operations, you name it, I was responsible for it. Meanwhile, my father became less involved with the day-to-day work. Most of the time, he simply let me lead while he sat back, smiled during meetings, and looked at me as though I was the proof that everything he had built would continue after him. Naturally, I believed I was next in line. I honestly thought he saw me as his business partner, maybe even the person who would eventually take over the company. Instead, I learned I had only been keeping the position warm for someone else. The first warning sign came on an ordinary Monday morning. My father asked me to come in before everyone else arrived, which wasn't unusual during busy seasons, but something about his voice immediately felt different. It wasn't the relaxed, collaborative tone I was used to hearing. It sounded rehearsed, almost as though he had practiced every word before I walked through the door. When I entered his office with a cup of coffee in my hand, he was already sitting perfectly upright behind his desk with his fingers folded together. Sitting across from him was my younger brother, Kevin. He was 24, fresh out of college, and until recently had spent far more time talking about Bitcoin and influencer marketing than anything related to logistics. "Ethan," my father said as he motioned for me to sit down, "we've been thinking about the future." I glanced over at Kevin, who gave me the same crooked grin he always wore whenever he was pretending to know more than he actually did. It was the exact same smile he flashed after forgetting my birthday the year before and trying to blame it on scheduling a text message incorrectly. I slowly sat down, waiting for whatever was coming next. "I'd like you to start training Kevin," my father said. "Teach him everything, the accounts, the operating systems, the customer relationships, all of it. Eventually, I'd like him to take over operations while you shift your attention toward long-term strategy." I blinked a couple of times because I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. "Wait, take over operations? You mean my job?" I asked. My father leaned back in his chair without the slightest hint of concern. "Yes, you'll oversee the bigger picture instead of managing the daily operations. It's a natural transition." Before I could respond, Kevin leaned forward with that same smug grin. "Relax, bro. I'm not going to destroy the place. I just need a quick crash course." Looking back, I should have spoken up right then. I should have laid everything out and challenged the entire plan, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled, nodded, and played the role of the good son. Then I walked out of that office feeling like someone had tied my stomach into knots. Over the next several days, I kept trying to convince myself that I had misunderstood what my father meant. Maybe I had taken it the wrong way. Maybe he planned to explain everything later. But no matter how hard I tried to justify it, the truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't some shared leadership plan. It was a demotion. My responsibilities had been handed to Kevin without anyone even asking me, while I was pushed into some vague strategy position that nobody could clearly explain. Meanwhile, Kevin wandered around the office as if he already owned the company. He asked interns where we kept the energy drinks and proudly showed off his expensive new watch like it somehow qualified him to manage freight operations. I kept waiting for my father to pull me aside and reassure me. I expected him to say something like, "Ethan, you're still the foundation of this company. This is only temporary." But that conversation never happened. Instead, Kevin was given a brand new office. Without even telling me, they started remodeling mine. I found out when I walked in one morning and nearly tripped over a pile of Amazon boxes filled with gaming chairs, LED lights, and other things Kevin had ordered. Even my nameplate had disappeared without anyone saying a word. I wish I could tell you that was the moment I finally exploded, marched into the conference room, and turned the place upside down. But I didn't. I swallowed my frustration and kept the business running. I continued showing up before everyone else, staying later than anyone, and answering questions that Kevin didn't even realize he should have been asking. I kept doing the work because I genuinely loved that company. Maybe part of me also didn't know who I was without it. Then came the second hit, and this one felt even more personal. It took Kevin exactly 6 days to make his first major disaster. One careless decision nearly destroyed our relationship with one of our oldest clients, Delaney Freight Lines, a family-owned trucking company that had worked with us since I was in high school. They weren't our biggest account, but they were among our most loyal customers. Every winter when other companies backed out because of dangerous weather, the Delaneys always stayed with us. They trusted me because we had built our relationship on years of mutual respect and simple handshake agreements. Kevin managed to throw all of that away after deciding to optimize their delivery routes with some third-party AI routing software he found on an expensive SaaS marketplace. The new routes sent several of their trucks straight into a severe storm. 3 trucks ended up off the road, and one of their drivers suffered a broken leg and had to be hospitalized. Mr. Delaney called me furious, and while I was trying to calm him down, I discovered that Kevin had already emailed him a shrugging gif along with the words, "We live and learn." I don't think I've ever been more embarrassed in my life. I called my father immediately while pacing around the parking lot behind the building. "Dad, this is a disaster," I said. "We could lose Delaney. One of their drivers ended up in the hospital, and Kevin responded with a gif." There was silence for a moment before my father finally answered. "He's still learning. Cut him some slack." I actually laughed because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "If I'd done something like this when I was 24, you would have torn me apart." His voice immediately turned cold. "You're not 24 anymore," he replied. "You're 35. You're old enough to handle your brother's lack of experience." Hearing those words made everything click into place for the first time. This had never been about giving Kevin a chance to prove himself. It was about making me carry his weight while he collected the rewards. Over the following week, the changes became impossible to ignore. Little by little, responsibilities that had always belonged to me were quietly shifted over to him. Reports that normally landed on my desk were now sent directly to Kevin. Longtime clients I had personally managed for years were reassigned without anyone asking me. Even my access to certain company emails suddenly became restricted. They claimed it was a technical issue, but somehow I was also left out of an important investor conference call. I only found out it had happened after I happened to glance at Kevin's calendar and noticed a meeting labeled Quarterly Update with Lead Operator. Lead Operator. That had always been my title. A few days later, I asked my father to have lunch with me. We went to the small Greek restaurant near the office where we'd been eating together for years. That place was full of memories, shared meals, inside jokes, and conversations that used to make me feel like we were partners. This time, there wasn't any warmth between us. He acted like we were discussing quarterly profits instead of family. I finally put my fork down and looked him in the eye. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Are you pushing me out?" He didn't hesitate for even a second. "Not pushing you out," he replied calmly. "Just repositioning you." I stared at him. "That's corporate language," I said. "You mean you're phasing me out?" "Ethan, don't be so dramatic," he answered. "You're still part of the company's future." Kevin simply brings a fresh perspective. He's young, he's good with technology, and investors like seeing that. "He doesn't even understand this business," I shot back. "He doesn't respect it. He's treating this office like it's some TikTok trend." My father let out a slow breath and leaned back in his chair. "You've had your turn," he said. "Maybe it's time to step aside and let someone else have theirs." Those words hit harder than anything else he had said. You've had your turn. As though my role in the company had already ended. As though I had become some outdated piece of equipment that needed to be replaced. While Kevin ran around the office decorating his door with motivational quotes and showing off his bright new keyboard, I quietly got up from lunch and walked away before I said something I'd regret. That evening, I stayed behind at the office long after everyone else had gone home. The lights were off except for a few emergency fixtures, and the only sound was the steady hum of the vending machine. I wandered through the building almost like a ghost, running my hand across desks, whiteboards, conference room chairs, and workstations that still carried the warmth of the day's meetings and coffee-fueled brainstorming sessions. I had helped build every part of that place. Pieces of my life were everywhere I looked. Yet somehow, I felt like an outsider walking through someone else's business. 4 days later, everything finally came crashing down. When I walked into the office that morning, I saw several members of my team gathered around Kevin in the break room. These were people I had personally hired, trained, and mentored over the years. Kevin stood there handing out cupcakes with a huge smile on his face. Promotion cupcakes, he announced proudly. Dad made it official. I'm the new chief of operations. For a second, I just stood there. The room went completely quiet the moment everyone noticed me. Someone even stepped aside awkwardly, almost like I had wandered into the wrong meeting. I looked directly at Kevin. What? He smiled without a trace of guilt. Oh, yeah, Dad was going to tell you. It was kind of a last-minute decision, but I'm officially running operations now. Pretty awesome, right? I didn't answer him. Instead, I turned around, walked straight to my father's office, and opened the door. He looked up from his laptop without the slightest sign of surprise. You made him chief of operations? I asked quietly. My father closed the laptop. It was going to happen eventually, he said. It's better to rip the bandage off. I slowly shook my head. You don't rip off a bandage when someone's still bleeding, I replied. You help them first. This is simply a business decision. No, I answered. It's a family decision pretending to be a business decision, and you didn't even bother hiding it. He stood up and walked around his desk. Ethan, if this is about titles or your ego, it's about respect, I interrupted, pointing toward the door. He never worked overnight shifts. He never stayed awake because a shipment was delayed. He didn't even know what net 30 payment terms meant until a few days ago. My father's face hardened. You don't get to question my decisions, he said coldly. This is my company. You work here because I allow you to. There it was. No pretending. No appreciation. Just 11 years of sacrifice, loyalty, and endless work reduced to a favor that he claimed he had been doing for me. I took a slow breath. Then let me make this easy for you, I said. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I didn't hesitate. I quit. He raised an eyebrow. You're serious? You said I'd already had my turn, I replied. Fine. Enjoy your future. Then I walked away. There wasn't any dramatic confrontation. I didn't slam the door or yell. I simply left. The cold air outside hit me like a wall. That night, I didn't sleep at all. My phone kept vibrating with calls and messages from coworkers and friends asking what had happened. Kevin even sent me a meme of someone waving goodbye with the caption, "Don't let the door hit you." I ignored every single message. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, wondering who I was now, that the only life I'd known was suddenly gone. The funny thing about being underestimated is that people stop paying attention to you. Once they convince themselves you're finished, they stop watching your next move. What my father never realized was that the company wasn't held together by spreadsheets or executive meetings. It depended on relationships. It depended on trust. And I knew exactly where every weak spot was. The morning after I resigned felt unnaturally quiet. There were no emergency meetings, no endless calendar alerts, and no sound of Kevin playing lo-fi music through the speakers that used to fill my office. Instead, I sat alone at my kitchen table wearing a hoodie, staring at a cup of coffee that had already gone cold beside an untouched breakfast sandwich I barely remembered making. The silence was almost unbearable. For 11 straight years, my mornings had started with urgent client calls, shipping problems, and nonstop deadlines. Now I was sitting at home with no job, turning 36 next month, without a backup plan or any real idea what came next. I wish I could tell you I jumped out of bed full of determination, ready to build something even bigger. That isn't what happened. If I'm being honest, I fell apart for a while. My first week was spent bouncing between Netflix, takeout food, and ignoring phone calls from people I wasn't emotionally ready to talk to. The apartment that had once been nothing more than a place to sleep between 12-hour workdays suddenly felt like a prison. I couldn't sit still. I was angry. I felt completely lost. The same sentence from my father kept replaying in my mind. You work here because I allow you to. Those words erased years of hard work in a single moment. They made it sound like everything I'd accomplished meant nothing, as if I had simply been some temporary employee he had tolerated all along. The hardest part wasn't even losing the job. It was losing the identity that came with it. For years, I had been the company. People trusted my judgment. Clients depended on me. Employees came to me when something mattered. Now, I was just another guy sitting around in sweatpants watching reruns of a cooking show I didn't even like, while Kevin was probably sitting in my office with his feet on my desk, acting like he had actually earned as painful as everything had been. Something inside me slowly began to change. It wasn't sudden, and it definitely wasn't easy, but little by little I stopped thinking only about what I'd lost and started thinking about what might come next. The first message came from Derek, the head of fleet maintenance. It was only 6 words. You didn't deserve that, dude. Those 6 words hit me harder than I expected. They cracked open something I'd been trying to keep buried. Over the next several days, more messages started coming in. Rachel from accounting reached out. Then Hannah from customer service. Even 3 of the younger dispatchers contacted me. They all said different versions of the same thing. The company already felt different without me. Things were becoming disorganized. Simple tasks were falling apart because Kevin didn't understand them, and morale throughout the office had dropped fast. At first, I wasn't sure what to do with any of that information. I wasn't interested in begging for my old position back. That chapter was over. But another idea slowly started taking shape. It wasn't driven by anger anymore. It felt calmer, more focused. If they didn't want me sitting at their table, maybe it was finally time to build my own. The idea hit me around 3 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. I was lying awake scrolling through job listings when I came across an advertisement for a freight brokerage certification program. I didn't need someone to teach me logistics. I could have taught the course myself. But seeing it sparked something. What if I stopped looking for another company to hire me? What if I built one instead? The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. I understood the logistics business inside and out. I knew exactly where companies wasted money. I knew which clients were being overcharged and which drivers deserved better pay. I knew who felt ignored. I knew who wanted better service. And I knew there were people who would gladly work with me if I gave them the opportunity. I didn't need an expensive office or a giant warehouse. Not yet. All I really needed was a laptop, a phone, and a solid plan. That same night, I opened a blank document on my computer and titled it Phase 1. Then I started reaching out to people. I wasn't trying to steal clients or employees. Not at that point. I simply wanted to understand what they actually needed. The very first call I made was to Delaney Freight Lines. After Kevin's disaster, they still hadn't renewed their contract with my father's company. Marissa Sullivan, the owner, answered the phone sounding completely worn out. "Ethan, is that really you?" she asked. "Yeah, it's me," I said. "I just wanted to check in. I heard about your driver. How's he doing?" She sighed heavily. "Broken femur. He's recovering, but it's going to take a long time." After a brief pause, I decided to be honest. "If you're still looking at logistics partners, I'm working on something. It's not officially launched yet, but if I build a company that's smaller, more responsive, and actually pays attention to its customers, would you consider giving me a chance?" There was silence for several seconds. Finally, she answered, "Build it, Ethan, and you'll have your first client." That was all the encouragement I needed. Using what little savings I had, along with a small personal loan from my old college roommate Nathan, I officially formed my own LLC. I called it Ankor Logistics. The name felt right. I wasn't taking over someone else's business. I was building my own from the ground up. Those first few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. My office was nothing more than a folding table squeezed into the corner of my living room. There was no receptionist, no office manager, no expensive CRM software. Just spreadsheets, endless phone calls, and sheer determination. I reached out to independent drivers I'd worked with over the years. I built a simple shipment tracking website using free open source tools. I personally handled every invoice, every customer call, every scheduling issue, and every client concern. It was exhausting, but every single success belonged to me. Starting over has a funny way of changing how people see you. For years, everyone had viewed me as the dependable guy who always kept things running. Now, people started looking at me like the underdog. And people love cheering for an underdog, especially when they already have reasons to root against the favorite. Within 6 weeks, Ankor Logistics had signed 5 clients. They weren't massive contracts, but they were solid businesses that had felt neglected after Kevin took over. One of those clients even forwarded me an email chain showing that Kevin had used ChatGPT to generate a shipping schedule, only for it to produce a completely incorrect freight route. I didn't laugh. I simply saved a screenshot. Of course, not everything went smoothly. I made my own mistakes too. One day I forgot to schedule a follow-up call with a client and nearly lost the account. Another time my internet crashed halfway through an important Zoom presentation, forcing me to finish the pitch from the parking lot of a Starbucks while it was raining outside. Running your own company teaches you lessons the hard way. Every success belongs to you. Every failure belongs to you too. But that was exactly what made it different. This business was mine. I wasn't covering for a golden child obsessed with social media. I was the one actually doing the work. A little while later, I saw Kevin for the first time since I had walked away. I was leaving an office supply store after buying printer ink when I noticed him across the parking lot climbing into a brand new Audi. He never looked my way. Or maybe he did, and simply chose to ignore me. Either way, watching him adjust his expensive sunglasses before driving off rubbed me the wrong way. He still believed he had won. For a moment, I considered getting back in my car and leaving. Instead, I sat down behind the wheel, pulled out my notebook, and started writing. Not a list of people, a list of opportunities. I wrote down broken systems, vendors my father's company had treated poorly, clients they had lost, drivers who had been burned. I wasn't planning revenge. That was never the goal. My plan was much simpler. I was going to outwork them. I was going to outlast them. While Kevin spent his time polishing his LinkedIn profile and showing off at business expos, I stayed focused on the work that actually mattered. I was rebuilding everything from the ground up. Every contract I signed, every email I answered, and every mile driven by one of my partner drivers pushed me one step closer to something I hadn't even allowed myself to imagine before. Sooner or later, Kevin was going to learn that respect isn't something you inherit. Loyalty doesn't automatically come with a family name. Leadership can't be faked with cupcake parties, flashy job titles, or expensive suits. And replacing the person who built the system without understanding how it actually works almost always ends the same way. By the 4th month, Ankor Logistics wasn't just surviving anymore, it was growing. I had 6 steady clients, 3 part-time virtual assistants, and a dependable network of freelance drivers who genuinely enjoyed working with me. We weren't flashy. We didn't have glowing signs outside an office or branded pens sitting in conference rooms. What we had was reliability. We answered the phone. We delivered on time. We treated people honestly. There were no AI-generated schedules, no tone-deaf memes sent to frustrated clients, and no executives wasting hours in meaningless synergy meetings while trucks sat parked waiting for instructions. We had real systems. We had discipline. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building something that nobody could ever take away from me. More than anything else, I had something that couldn't be bought. I had trust. And once I realized that, I started thinking much bigger. At first, it wasn't about building a huge company or getting revenge. Honestly, revenge wasn't even on my mind. During the first 3 months after leaving, all my energy went into keeping Ankor Logistics alive. I was fighting to prove to myself that walking away hadn't been the biggest mistake of my life. But success has a strange way of clearing your head. Once the constant pressure of simply surviving began to fade, I finally had room to look back. That's when I started noticing the cracks spreading through the company I had once helped build. At first, it was nothing more than whispers. Former coworkers who still kept in touch would mention the little things here and there. Kevin had started taking shortcuts. He was outsourcing work he didn't understand. Instead of fixing the company's outdated shipment tracking system, he hired a social media manager. One of the drivers even told me he had to pay for his own fuel because Kevin's office had lost the reimbursement paperwork. Then, about a month later, a real opportunity presented itself. I met Rachel for lunch. She had always been one of the sharpest people in accounting, the kind of person who caught mistakes before anyone else even noticed them. She was also one of the few people from my father's company I still completely trusted. After I left, she never picked sides, but she also never pretended Kevin knew what he was doing. I still remembered one of her favorite descriptions of him. A puppy trying to run a farm. We met at a small ramen restaurant, halfway between her office and my apartment. The moment I saw her, I knew something was wrong. She looked exhausted. Before I'd even finished sitting down, she leaned across the table. "Things are bad," she said. Then she paused. "I mean, really bad." I raised an eyebrow. "Worse than the Delaney freight disaster?" She didn't smile. That alone told me everything. "They lost 2 major contracts last week," she said. "One of them was Ashford Construction." My stomach tightened. "Ashford?" I repeated. "That's over a third of the company's second quarter revenue." She nodded. "Closer to 45% if you include the imported supply contracts." I leaned back in my chair. "What happened?" Kevin promised them a fleet upgrade the company couldn't actually provide. Once they realized he'd overpromised, they walked away completely. I let that sink in. Then Rachel looked at me. "Want to know who he blamed?" I already knew the answer before she said it. "You." I shook my head. "Of course." "He told everyone you had overestimated the equipment replacement budget," she continued. "Never mind the fact that you warned him 3 different times in writing." I frowned. "I know exactly what I wrote." "He forwarded your emails to your father," she said, "but he edited them first. All of your warnings disappeared." I stared at her. "He actually changed my emails?" She nodded. "And your father either believed him or pretended he did." That conversation changed everything. Until then, I had assumed they were simply struggling. Now I realized they were desperate. That night, I sat alone at my desk for hours. My phone stayed face down while I stared at a spreadsheet. Not a financial spreadsheet. A list of names, clients, vendors, former employees. Pressure points. Patterns. For the first time since leaving, I stopped thinking about survival. It was time to compete. But I wasn't interested in acting out of anger. If I was going to beat the company that had pushed me aside, I needed to do it carefully. Every move had to matter. The first step was gathering information. Fortunately, I already had a strong network. Former clients, former coworkers, vendors. People who were tired of dealing with what one supplier jokingly called Kevin's influencer management style. But complaints alone weren't enough. I needed facts. I needed leverage. So I reached out to Diego. Diego had been the company's systems administrator for over 10 years. He was quiet, always wore the same gray hoodie, and somehow managed to stay invisible to upper management, despite keeping the entire company's technology running. He was also badly underpaid. I had always treated him with respect. Whenever servers crashed late at night, I'd bring him coffee. During overnight security upgrades, I'd stay with him until everything was finished. We weren't close friends, but we trusted each other. We met one Thursday evening at a dim little pub where the music was soft enough to actually hold a conversation, and the drinks were stronger than they probably should have been. He took a sip of whiskey. "Heard you're running your own company now." "I am," I replied. "I also heard you're dealing with Kevin's technology disasters." He smirked. The guy thinks HTML is some kind of cloud storage. We both laughed. After the laughter faded, I leaned forward. "I could use your help." He looked at me carefully. "I'm not asking you to do anything illegal," I said. "But if you happen to know about deleted documents, audit logs, backup archives, or any weaknesses inside the system?" He tilted his head. "Hypothetically?" "Exactly," I answered. He never agreed. He never refused either. 4 days later, an encrypted zip file appeared in my inbox. The file was named lunch_me_notes. Inside was a goldmine: archived email chains, transaction records, client communications, hidden mistakes, broken promises, deleted conversations. There was even an audio recording of Kevin screaming at a customer on the phone and calling him a boomer with trucker brain because the client questioned one of his brilliant modern ideas. I didn't release any of it. That wasn't the point. The value wasn't in using it immediately. The value was knowing I had it. Next, I focused on clients. I started meeting people quietly. Coffee here, dinner there. Sometimes just short conversations in parking lots after work. I never pressured anyone. I never tried to steal accounts. I simply told them one thing: if you ever need a better option, give me a call. Some were curious. Others had already heard about Ankor Logistics. But I still needed one big break. It came from someone I never expected. Vanessa Cole. She managed purchasing for a mid-size agricultural supply company I'd worked with years earlier. Vanessa had never been afraid to speak her mind. She was direct, demanding, and completely allergic to corporate nonsense. We had argued once over a delayed shipment years before, but we handled the disagreement professionally. After that, she respected me. One afternoon, she called out of nowhere. "Heard you're still alive," she joked. "Doing my best," I laughed. "I've got a problem," she said. "What happened?" "Your brother promised us a 4-day turnaround on animal feed deliveries." "And?" "It took 8 days." I sighed. "Then he actually told us we should adjust our expectations because he was changing the paradigm." She paused. "What the hell does that even mean?" I couldn't help smiling. "It means he's drowning and trying to convince everyone it's innovation." She burst out laughing. Then her tone changed. "Send me your pricing." I sat up straighter. "Seriously? If you can guarantee delivery within 6 days or less, you've got the contract." That was the opening I had been waiting for. I poured everything I had into earning her trust. Every shipment arrived on time. I personally checked in throughout the process. Every update was customized. Every promise was kept. Vanessa noticed. And more importantly, so did the people she knew. Within 4 weeks, 4 different companies connected to her business reached out to me. Every one of them told a similar story. They were frustrated. They were tired of excuses. They wanted someone dependable again. Before long, word about Ankor Logistics started spreading on its own. At first, Kevin didn't even realize what was happening. He was too busy posting inspirational quotes on LinkedIn about rising from the ashes and organizing company ping pong tournaments. My father noticed long before he did. I know that because one afternoon he called me out of nowhere. "Ethan," he said carefully, I've been hearing that you're doing business with several of our former clients." I stayed calm. "They were never your clients," I replied. "They're customers who choose whoever gives them the best service." There was a long pause. "You understand this isn't a game," he finally said. "You're burning bridges." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No," I answered. "You burned that bridge the day you chose a slogan on a sweatshirt over the person who built your foundation. He let out a heavy sigh. I never wanted things to end up like this. Then you shouldn't have lit the match. I ended the call. After that, I pushed even harder. I launched a new client portal, hired another assistant, increased my driver's pay above the market average, and treated every one of them like a partner instead of another replaceable employee. The final piece was visibility. A few years earlier, I'd spoken as a guest on a local business podcast, and the host still owed me a favor. I reached out and pitched a simple story. A son leaves the family business and builds something of his own. They loved the idea. We recorded the entire interview in one session. I never mentioned my father. I never said Kevin's name. I didn't attack anyone. I simply told the truth. I talked about how loyalty isn't always returned, how leadership has to be earned instead of inherited, how vision means nothing if you can't actually execute it. The episode aired the following week. By the next Monday, I had 55 new inquiries sitting in my inbox. Meanwhile, my father's company posted its worst quarterly results in 7 years. But I still wasn't finished. Everything I had done up to that point, every late night, every client, every strategic move, had only been setting the stage. The biggest move was still ahead. And this time it wasn't just business, it was personal. I chose a Tuesday on purpose. It fell right before my father's quarterly review meeting, the same meeting I used to organize every quarter before Kevin took over. Ironically, he had recently forgotten to schedule one until 20 minutes before it started and blamed the mistake on an email filter. It had been 10 months since I walked out of that office with nothing except my pride and a quiet determination to prove everyone wrong. 10 months of rebuilding my life from nothing. 10 months of watching Kevin stumble through a job he had never earned. 10 months of seeing my father stand behind him as though everything was perfectly under control. Except it wasn't. Ankor Logistics had grown into a real company. We weren't the scrappy little startup anymore. We had 15 active clients. We were negotiating a warehouse lease. 3 delivery fleets were operating under contract. Our dispatchers and planners worked like a family. And our reputation spread through word of mouth because our work spoke louder than any advertising campaign ever could. My father's company was falling apart. They had lost nearly half of their longtime contracts. 3 major investors had already walked away. Driver turnover had reached record levels. Their accounting was becoming increasingly chaotic. Kevin still couldn't untangle the maze of vendor agreements, payment schedules, and billing systems that I had spent years building. They were exposed, but I wasn't interested in humiliating them. I wanted something cleaner than that. So I invited my father to lunch. He sounded genuinely surprised when he accepted. We met at the same little Greek restaurant where we had shared countless meals over the years. The same place where he once told me I had already had my turn. I didn't expect this invitation, he admitted after we sat down. I figured we should talk, I said as I took a bite of my gyro. See how things are going. He nodded quietly. Kevin's still adjusting. I simply smiled. After a few moments, he looked at me. I've heard Ankor Logistics is doing well. Better than well, I answered. We're growing fast. I watched his expression change. For the first time, I could see him realizing I hadn't come there looking for reconciliation. I had come with an offer. When I mentioned that, he looked confused. An offer? A way out. A way out of what? Your situation. I didn't sugarcoat it. You've lost over $2.3 million in contracts this quarter. Your investors are nervous. Employee turnover is hurting daily operations, and Kevin isn't leading the company. I paused. He's becoming its biggest liability. My father didn't interrupt. He simply listened. I continued. I'm willing to purchase 3 of your largest remaining client accounts. His eyes narrowed. They've already approached me. The only reason they haven't switched yet is because they wanted to see whether they could separate cleanly. I leaned back. I'll make the transition fair. You'll receive the cash, stabilize whatever remains of the company, and decide what you want to do after that. He stared at me. You're trying to strip this company apart. I slowly shook my head. No. I held his gaze. I'm giving you the only opportunity left to save part of it. I paused. Because if I really wanted to destroy your company, all I'd have to do is let Kevin keep running it. Silence settled over the table. For the first time in years, my father actually looked at me. Not with disappointment. Not with arrogance. Not with anger. With fear. Finally, he spoke. I'll discuss it with Kevin. I nodded. You should. Deep down, though, I already knew he wouldn't accept. So I moved forward with my final step. I sent the information Diego had quietly provided, the archived emails, the transaction records, the internal logs, the audio recordings. I didn't send them anonymously. I signed my own name. I included a professional letter explaining my concerns about mismanagement, ethical failures, and decisions that could expose the company to serious legal and financial consequences. Within a few hours, one of the remaining investors replied, "Thank you for your transparency," the message read. "We'll begin an internal audit immediately." Everything unraveled after that. The next morning, 4 senior employees resigned. Kevin responded by posting another vague LinkedIn update about reorganizing with purpose. A week later, 3 more clients left and signed contracts with Ankor Logistics. Then came the board meeting. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. Rachel was there. After it ended, my phone buzzed. One short message appeared on the screen. "He's gone." Another followed immediately. The board voted 5-1 to remove Kevin from operations. I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I was surprised, because I knew exactly who had cast the only vote to keep him. My father. He stayed loyal to Kevin until the very end, even as the company was sinking beneath him. Kevin didn't accept defeat quietly. 4 days later, he stormed into my office. His face was bright red. He looked like he was shaking with anger. My employees stopped talking the moment they saw him. I calmly walked over, motioned toward the hallway, and closed the glass door behind us. He glared at me. "You think you've won?" I looked at him. All I saw was someone who had been thrown into deep water without ever learning how to swim. "I don't have to think I've won," I answered calmly. "I built this." I gestured toward my office. "You tried pretending to be a founder and everything fell apart in less than a year?" I shrugged. "That's not winning or losing. That's reality." His face twisted. "You sabotaged me." I quietly shook my head. "No." I held his eyes. "You sabotaged yourself. I just stopped rescuing you." He opened his mouth to argue. I turned around before he could say another word and walked back into my office. I left him standing alone in the hallway. The silence behind me said everything. The consequences came fast. Within a month, the audit became public. Investors filed lawsuits over deceptive practices. Clients demanded compensation. Vendors ended their partnerships. My father tried desperately to regain control, but it was too late. They sold off assets, laid off almost everyone, reduced the company to a skeleton crew. 5 months later, the business officially closed its doors. There were no dramatic headlines, no television cameras, just silence. Where a successful company had once stood, nothing remained. I never celebrated their downfall. I didn't post cryptic messages online. I didn't brag in interviews. None of that mattered. This had never been about revenge. It was about earning my freedom. It was about proving the truth. One evening, I sat alone in my new office. A real office this time. Not a folding table squeezed into my apartment. Outside my door, I could hear my team laughing while they shared snacks and swapped stories after work. My whiteboard was covered with new ideas, expansion plans, and client names that I had earned one relationship at a time. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my father. "I never knew how to let go. You were right. I just wasn't ready to admit it." I looked at the words for a long moment. Then I turned the phone over and set it face down on my desk. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Not because he had finally admitted the truth, because I realized I no longer needed him to. He still had his idea of a legacy. I had built mine with my own hands from the ground up.